Alright, so now that we've covered the basics of unrolling, if you zoom out a little bit, we're going to unroll these objects. And we're actually going to get them ready for the laser cutter. Or the laser cutter sheet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all these objects. I'm just going to hide them. Alright, so this first object, I'm going to unroll this. And this first object is very similar to the two boxes that we had. And type in show. It's similar to these two boxes, where the first time I tried to unroll the red one, it was just coming out as a jumbled mess. So essentially what I had to do with the purple version is explode it and then group them or join them in these individual pieces where I knew they would unroll correctly. Let me hide these. So essentially I have to do the same thing with this. So it's not unrolling as one object, and that's because it has too many overlapping parts because of the geometry, the overall geometry of this object. So what I want to do is I essentially did the same method where I exploded the entire thing and then just joined them individually. So I have 5 separate parts. So I'm going to select the first part. I'm going to unroll it. I'm going to say explode equals no, labels equals no. I'm going to move that out of the way. And explode this one. Move that out of the way. I'm just hitting the space bar because I'm just repeating the same command. Move that out of the way. Move that out of the way. And then select the last part. So you should have 5 separate parts. So when you come back over here, let's see, show surface ISO curve, turn those off. I go to my top view. And now I'm just going to separate these into their 5 different parts. Now what I can do is I can use my duplicate border and duplicate edge commands. Duplicate border, so I get to the outside. I go to my layers, I put it in cut. And then I do duplicate edge. And I zoom in here and I just select just the individual pieces, or just the individual edges, and these are the ones that are going to go into the score layer. So again, it's just you have to be careful not to select them all at once because it's going to select multiple edges. So you just have to go through and just select them individually. I think we got them all. Hit enter, put those in the score layer. And now at this point, if you want, you can move the surfaces out of the way. I'm just holding down Shift key. If you accidentally select the wrong thing, Shift adds to a selection and Control subtracts from a selection. So here I hold Shift to add, and I hold Control and click to subtract. I can move these out of the way. And just to make things a little bit easier, I'm going to select these and just group them. Just a good habit to get into. I'm just reusing the same command, so I'm just hitting the space bar again. So now those are all grouped. And one thing what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to copy and paste these into a separate file, the actual laser cutting file. But before I do that, I just want to explain one thing about these score lines. So essentially, these score lines are scoring the material on top, but it doesn't take into account which way the material bends, if it bends up or down or left or right. So depending on what kind of material you use, sometimes it'll work for you, sometimes it'll work against you. Another thing that you can do is you can make a layer and call it cut dashed. Again, set it to cyan. And this time, under line weight, instead of saying continuous, you can click on dashed. And what you can do is, this object's grouped. I'm going to ungroup it. Say, for example, you want to select those, put them in cut dashed instead. So what it should do, instead of scoring it only on one side, it should cut all the way through, but in these dashes. If the dashes are too close to each other, you could always type in the command. I always forget the name of the command. I always know it's a scale, a type of scale. So I start by typing scale, and then I look for, let's see, where is it? Scale dimension style? No. Oh, scale dim style. No. Let's see, doing something wrong. Oh, set line type scale. There it is. So instead of 1, I'll do, say, for example, 10. And I can see how that has now changed my dashes. Or I can do it again and do 20, 30, till I get to a number where it'll look pretty good, where I know it's cutting enough material, but it's also leaving enough material where it's not going to snap off and just break off. So that's also an option, or you can just leave them at these score lines. It's just personal preference, but at least now you have a different way of doing this. So I'll take this one and I'm going to group it. So once you've unrolled everything, you have these all the line work. So you have the score line work and the cut line work, and if you're going to use dashed cut, you have everything set up. I'd recommend that you group everything. It's just easier. You select everything and just copy it. And the file that you're going to need for the laser cutter is this file. The one that is called laser cutter template. So essentially you bring it into this file and you just paste it. So now your pieces are now pasted in here. So again, here's score is blue, cut is cyan. I'm going to put these on, if you zoom in on these sheets, all these sheets correspond to different scales. So if you're doing a 1/2 inch scale model, you would use this sheet. If you're using a 1/4 inch scale model, you would use this sheet. If you're not using a scale at all, like you're cutting it to true size, then you'd use this little tiny one where it says scale 1 = 1. So in this case, I think we're going to be using, I don't know if 1/8 inch is going to be too small or too large. Let me see. Let me just copy the sheet. Not 1/8 inch. Let's do 1/4 inch. That's still too big. How about 1/2? Yeah, that's fine. 1/2 is good. So say, for example, we're going to set this up at 1/2 inch scale. Right? So the size of your laser cutter, the overall sheet, I'm going to zoom in over here where it says scale 1 = 1. Type in distance. The overall size of your sheet is 18 inches by 32 inches, or 31.996. The other thing to also keep in mind is this little safety margin, which is 0.4 inches, which is going to come in handy a little bit later. But essentially, everything should stay inside the safety boundary. So at half-inch scale, this is 18 inches by 32 inches at our half-inch scale. So again, if I were just to move all these pieces and make room for them, making sure nothing overlaps, then I just take one 18 by 32 sheet and I set this up on the laser cutter bed, set it up to the sheet, and right before I print, this is a half-inch scale, so I go over here to half-inch and making sure this looks correct, and I set this up to print. Okay, so now say for example you're setting these up for a certain scale. In our case, it's half-inch. But the material you have is not exactly 18 inches by 32 inches. It's some other size other than 18 by 32. So how do you figure out what overall size you're going to need, right? Because this is essentially set up for 18 by 32. So as an example, let's just say our sheet is set up for, our sheet size is, we don't have a full 18 by 32, we have a 16 by 20, and that's our sheet size. That's all we have. So the way you start off is just simply by making your rectangle at real scale, 16, 20. Just going to rotate it, just so that it's as landscape. So essentially that's our sheet size, 16 by 20. The one thing that I need to keep in mind is this 0.4 offset margin, this little safety margin. So I select this and type in offset 0.4, and I offset that into the inside. So the only time you need the safety margin is when when one of your edges actually touches the edge of the laser cutter. So if you're using a full 18 by 32 sheet, all four edges touch the edge of the laser cutter. If you're using anything smaller, only the left-hand side and the top touch the laser cutter. So if I were to explode this, I essentially don't need these as safety margins. So I'm just gonna, if you want to, you could extend these so that it actually connects. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put these on the sheet layer. I'm gonna group them. So now we have our sheet, which is 16 inches by 20 inches, but it's at this scale. It's at real life scale. And what I needed to do is for it to be at a half-inch scale. So if you notice within all these sheets, scale 1 inch equals 1 foot, there's a number in parentheses. Half-inch, there's the number is 24 in parentheses. 3/8 is 32. Yep. Quarter inch is 48, and so on and so forth. So this number in parentheses, this is what I'm going to need to use to scale this sheet size accurately. So I'm going to go over here to scale, click an edge or corner point, type in 24, hit enter, and I knew I had to type in 24 because I'm using half-inch and that's in 24. That's my scale number. So now this sheet at half-inch scale is proportional to 16 inches by 20 inches. So that's how you make your own sheet size when it's not 18 by 32. So now I bring my sheet size over here. I move it to that corner. And I move all my pieces on here. For some reason, say for example, you can't get all your pieces to fit, but you have two sheets. You have two 18 by 32, or in our case, 16 by 20 sheets. I'll set up one sheet, copy it, and set up the other sheet. So as you can see why having these grouped beforehand is really useful, because as you're moving these around, it makes it really useful. Another useful tool to use, instead of having to constantly move this thing and rotating it with the gumball, is you can use the orient command. Copy equals no, and you can just say select 2 points, 1, 2, should match up to 2 points, that one and that one. The same thing here, I can just select 2 points, so I'm essentially reorientating these. That matches up there. And if I wanted to, I could probably find a tight enough fit where I can get all of these to work on one sheet. So just reorientating that. And if I mess with this enough, I can get them all to fit on one sheet. If you can't, then just use multiple sheets. And again, you're just taking this to the 1/2 inch scale, printing the first sheet. Yeah, this is too close. Just move this out of the way. So this would be my first print. I would send that through for the laser cutter. And then what I would do is I would send my second print. The one thing that you always want to be aware of is you're actually moving, so you're actually snapping from that top point to the arrow. Because if not, it won't line up with the laser cutter. And then you send this one through for printing purposes. So essentially you would just save this Rhino file, take it to the laser cutter, take your material, make sure it's already pre-cut, and laser cut.